Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa and Paul Young, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Maybe you've been listening for a while, or this is your first episode. If you like what you hear, would you do us a favor by rating and reviewing us on iTunes? This is a fantastic way to tell us you enjoy what we are creating. Also, if you want more MTSS resources, sign up for our weekly newsletter using the link in our show notes, and check out our website for all the blogs and guides you would ever need about MTSS. Managing a classroom and addressing the behavior of young students is no small feat, and having a supportive leader and principal by your side can make all the difference. And I know I was fortunate to have some mentors who guided me through these challenges, especially as a newer teacher. But today I'm excited to welcome Paul Young, who is a retired teacher, principal, and is a current professor in Ohio, to share his expertise on fostering and encouraging positive behaviors in elementary school students. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much.
We're so glad to have you here. I just wanted to ask, kind of just get us, for our listeners to get to know you just a little bit. As a longtime educator and principal, I'm sure that you have a favorite part of your day with students. Like, what was your favorite part of the day with students?
The favorite part of the day was lunch. I'll tell you a story. I had one little girl that had many special needs. And when I became the principal of the school, the teachers were telling me she can't learn anything. She gets under the desk and she makes noises and barks. And her teacher that came with me at that point, after about 2 weeks, said, I think she knows more than anybody gives her credit for. But see, what happened was the teacher bonded with her. The girl started to respond. Well, then she started to respond with me. So we would have lunch every day. And I mean, she had physical handicaps and mental handicaps. And did you ever try to eat peas on one of those little sporks? To try to get them on there. So we worked and we talked, and she couldn't hardly pronounce my name. It was always Dr. Ung. Other kids started to watch us, and then they all wanted to sit at the table too. They wanted that kind of attention that she was getting. So, as a principal, I figured, okay, I'll just go to the cafeteria and I'll eat and I'll talk to the kids, and you'd be surprised what you learn. But it also gave me an opportunity to teach, because I said, no, we're not going to sit at the table and be sloppy. We're going to pick up our waste, and we're going to talk in an appropriate voice. And it just sort of spread. So yeah, lunch was always, I loved recess too. I love to go out and play with the kids. So.
I love that. I think that I was just kind of wondering, everybody has whether it's like the beginning part of the day when kids are energized and excited and they're coming in, or, waving off at the end of the day. But that gives me a little insight into what kind of principal you were. So, so you've been a principal you were a principal for 20 years. You have tons of experience in schools, and I'm sure that you've seen a lot of different types of behaviors. Maybe you've tried out lots of different strategies, or recommended your teachers to try a lot of different strategies. Can you share a little bit about maybe what inspired you to take a different approach to managing behaviors?
Well, I had been a principal for probably close to 15 years in 3 other schools. And then the superintendent appeared at my office one day. It was actually in 1996. And he says, you're going to be the principal of West School next year. I said, what? Why me? What did I do wrong? Because our West School had the reputation in our city of Lancaster, Ohio, of being the poorest, and had the highest amount of suspensions, discipline problems. We were on the wrong end of any kind of measurement you could come up with. And so I went there reluctantly, and actually, as I look back, it turned out to be the best experience of my whole career. But at first, when I got there, I would, like the first couple of days of school, first couple of weeks, the office was full of kids being referred to me. And it had been the pattern, the culture of the way things were done in that school before I arrived, that if a kid was in trouble or had broken a rule or anything, go to the office, go to the office, go to the office. That was the routine. And I couldn't I wasn't used to that, and I wasn't going to be able to tolerate that, continual things for many offenses that were, totally inappropriate. Like, for instance, coming from the playground, boys were playing, fifth grade boys particularly were playing basketball, and it gets a little rough, and, they would elbow each other. And then when one of them would get elbowed too hard and fall to the ground, they start to cry. The duty teacher should have been in proximity of the game. And when they saw the tempers starting to escalate, they should have just blown their whistle, taken the ball, and let everybody cool off. Problem solved. There would have been no, as teachers were saying, fight, because the kids interpreted that to be a fight. And then they could go to the office. Well, that had to stop. So my approach was, and I think it comes back to my experience as a high school band director. You had to have discipline in a high school band with older kids. So I had close to 150 kids in my band. So we had to be disciplined. And that required a lot of teaching of everything. I mean, how your uniform was put on, and the way you took a step, and the way all of that. So some of that comes through as leading a school of kids and teachers. And it was just that nobody was maliciously doing anything wrong as far as my staff was concerned. They just weren't doing it to the level and standards of what I expected them to be able to do. We were fortunate at the same time to have team go to a project in Ohio called the Ohio Classroom Management Project. And we learned so much. And one of the approaches there was, kids need to learn what they're supposed to do. And I saw this when I was teaching my college classes. I mean, I would go into my college classes and my kids, I knew they were there to learn, but the nonverbals they were giving me were just irritating me to death. I'd go home and tell my wife, I don't think I can do this anymore. So finally I had it, and I came up with a presentation that I gave them on the first day of 10 characteristics of a work ethic that I thought they needed to know. Starts with attitude, and then we went through, competence and common sense and gratitude and initiative and professionalism and same kind of things I was really teaching to my band years ago. And then the same things that I was teaching to my staff, because my master teachers wanted things to be really, really good, but they had a really hard time of criticizing one of their colleagues. They wanted me to take over. So, I didn't need to criticize. I just needed to teach. So I decided to come back to my college classes and actually teach what I wanted them to know. I said, this is what I want to see with your attitude. This is what I want to see with initiative. I said, if you don't raise your hand in this class every day and ask a question or make a comment, I go home and I don't even know if you were there. I can't remember because you didn't make any initiative to do anything. And 85% of my kids got it. The classes, after that first lecture on the first day, there were always a few that dropped because they said, I'm not messing with that old man. But the ones that did stuck through. And years later, they still tell me, oh, you scared me the crap out of me on that first day. But it was the best class I ever had because we knew what the expectations were. We knew what we were supposed to do when you came there. And you taught us a lot of other things besides what the content was for that class. When my superintendent came through West School after I've been there probably, 6 months, he says, this is the quietest place. This is the quietest school in the district. I mean, there's a hum because there's a hum with what teachers are doing in a classroom, but the chaos was gone in the hallways and the teachers knew it, and the support staff knew it, the cooks knew it, the custodians knew it. They're the ones that are they're your radar. They can tell what really happens in a school.
Yeah, so true.
If your cooks and custodial and bus drivers are happy, you got a good place.
That is really true. I want to sort of kind of pinpoint something that you say of just about the nonverbal behaviors that you can kind of tell amongst, and I think that as an educator in a classroom, like your nonverbals of your students really indicate their level of engagement in the learning process. And I think the same way for, whether it be your staff or even college students. And I think that, that plus I think providing clarity of like, this is the expectation, and sometimes being really clear on what the expected behavior is. Because I know I taught middle school, and there's just times where I had to demonstrate this is the correct way to get my attention. Exactly. This is the correct way to walk down the hallway.
Exactly.
have to maybe repeat it over and over again because it takes
That
some.
was that was probably the best thing that came from the Ohio classroom management training was you have to teach what you want kids to do. So we actually came up with role playing. We had a major assembly, and we went through all those kinds of things you just mentioned: walking down the hallway, how you behave in the bathroom, how you walk into the classroom and talk to your teacher, how you make a line. Making a line in elementary school is one of those kind of things that kindergarten teachers struggle with, but then everybody else has to do it too. So all those things were so important, and the best thing that came out of that for us was they taught us that you need to make a code of conduct of the things you want to see. Our school name was WEST, so we just came up with the acronym using WEST of work for quality, earn respect, safety first, and treat others kindly. So as you just said, in a classroom, if you saw a kid one child wasn't treating another child very kindly, you stop and you say, what I observed wasn't good. Tell me how we want us at our school, how we want to treat others kindly to be demonstrated. And they knew when kids were referred to the office, I usually start with them right away. I said, what part of the code of conduct did you just mess up? Why are you here? What part did you mess up? Well, it was usually treating others kindly or earning respect, or if they weren't doing the work in the classroom for the teacher, usually the teacher had tipped me off ahead of time. I have to send this child to you for a little pep talk because they aren't doing the kind of work in the classroom and I know they can do. So immediately when they came to me, I said, are you working for quality? What does that mean? And most of them could tell me. And I said, no, go fix it because you don't want to come back here again. And then they did. So.
Well, and I think that what you're talking about is very interesting because it's not necessarily down to the classroom teacher to figure out how to address this student behavior within their own classroom. It's a bigger aspect, right? It's a school wide or even system wide. So, in some of the research and reading I did about your work, you talk a lot about seeing behavior issues as system problem rather than just kid problem. Because I think it's so easy for educators, especially these days, to be like, these kids are different, which, the generation of students we have today are different. They are encountering different challenges and obstacles in the world than I did or you did growing up. But how did you kind of reach that realization that it's not just a kid problem, but maybe a system problem?
I think it was because of my being assigned to that my West School, my last assignment, and knowing that other schools, kids could respond appropriately. At my final school, I was convinced that they were still going to toe the line just like anybody else. They didn't know what that line was. They didn't know what they were supposed to do. So, because nobody had taught them. So once they understood and we started to work on it, then the majority of now, when there were still a few outliers that that made it tough, but my good kids wanted things to be good. My good teachers wanted things to be good. They all wanted everybody to come along. I guess that I'm frustrated with principals today that cater to the 10% that are always the problems, and forget about the 10% that are the leaders, because if you pay attention to them, they'll bring others along. Urban Meyer had a great story. He was the football coach at Ohio State in a national championship about 10 years ago. And he wrote a story about going to the Woody Hayes Center in the morning at 6:00. Now, notice the head coach is there at 6:00 in the morning, but he had one of his All-American players was there working out and so forth. And he observed that for a while, and he realized, told that player, he says, you can't come back and work out here anymore at this time. And the player said, what did I do, coach? What's wrong? Why? And he played along with him for a while. He says, okay, I'll let you come, but you got to bring another player with you. So he brought another player who, was not as good as him. But what did Urban Meyer get out of that? 2 All-Americans, because the other kid realized if he worked with the All-American, he was going to do the same kind of things. So in a way, that's the same philosophy we had at West School. You follow the good kids and the rest of you will all be good. Follow my master teachers. Do what they do. And I had to celebrate that. But at the end of the year, that was one of our best days because we celebrated all that success with behavior and also we were doing PBIS probably before we ever had thought of what PBIS was. As we taught that code of conduct, we made up little slips of paper, and anytime a teacher saw a child, really doing the work for quality or earning respect, they just had, here's a ticket, fill it out, send it to the office. Then I would periodically draw names of kids and say what they did, and over the PA system in the morning, and I would invite them down to recite the Pledge of Allegiance with me. The day that my student that I referred to in the cafeteria eating with a spork, who could barely, she had limited verbal skills, but she came down and she recited the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, wow.
And I helped her. But I mean, there was a cheer that went off in that building that I could hear in the office because she had succeeded. And when you recognize positive things like that, that spreads.
Yeah.
It's like an infection.
Yeah. You mentioned, that there's some schools, I do think that there is, because I've worked in those schools where sometimes the attitude, without even realizing, I think there's teachers or even administrators that have this attitude of like, oh, this is a bad school, right? Quotations, like bad school. And so the expectations somehow are different than other schools. But I think it's just so interesting that you kind of talk about that it's about developing a system or developing a culture in your school, that there is a high expectation and students can meet that. They just need to know how to do that.
Right. In the years I've been working at this, I've thought a lot about culture. And I mean, when I was a beginning teacher, I probably never thought about it at all, but there's more and more being written about it and talked about it. And it comes down to this. This is how we do things around here. The climate, then, when they use the word climate, that's how it feels. But, when I walk into a school to visit, I can experience the climate immediately, how the secretary interacts with me or the office personnel, and whether or not you see an office full of kids that are there for something. But the culture then is the part that I have to be there for a while to know how that works. And then, but it's how do we do things around here? And if the way we're going to do things around here is go to the office, and let it be somebody else's responsibility, then that's not going to be so good. And the teachers, my master teachers, bought into that and said, yep, this is the way we have to do it. So we need to bring everybody else along. And I'll never forget the day I walked into my staff at a staff meeting. I said, this may shock some of you, but here's the reasons why I really think you should send kids to the office. If there's blood or vomit, yes. If there was drugs or weapons or anything like that, yeah, that's out of your league. Send it to me, and I'm gonna deal with it. If there's cheating going on, particularly on the high stakes test, and you are aware of it as a teacher, it might be one of your colleagues or whatever, you better make sure that I'm aware of it, because we're all going to go down the tubes. If the last one then is, if there's violence or a threat, kid is not responding to reasonable directions and they're simply defying you, then that needs to come to the office also. However, I told him, I said, I'm probably going to wonder if a kid is standing on a desk threatening you.
What happened before that?
What provoked that kid to get that angry?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I had, but then, my master teacher said, yep, this is it. And I had teachers everywhere telling me there's no reason why, you need to have kids go to the office all the time if you know how to manage your kids in the first place. And they became empowered, and the kids responded just like I knew they would. When the teacher said no, that meant no. They didn't have to have me tell them that. They knew that the teacher was the boss. Yeah. And they knew that if they didn't get along with the teacher, they had to come see me. Then the hammer was really going to drop. So.
Yeah. Well, and I want to sort of talk a little bit about that, sort of kind of off of that, about one of the strategies of just focusing on prevention rather than reaction to problematic behaviors. So what does that actually look like in practice? And if you have a story that comes to mind.
We have a little boy. I had a little boy. His name was Adam. And he was a third grader, and he was little. So, he had all the issues that boys have, when you're smaller, you get picked on. And he knew more 4-letter words than any of us. And he could let them fly all the time, especially the word that rhymed with truck. He loved that one. And he was on the playground, and the kids would run up to the duty teacher and say, Adam said the F word, Adam said the F word. Well, sometimes he did, and sometimes he didn't. The kids had gotten to the point where they realized they could try to blame Adam for a lot of the stuff that really wasn't Adam's fault, and that Adam would take the fall for it. And the teacher that Adam had in third grade decided that she was going to come up with a plan that was going to see if she could save this kid. And she came up with an intervention plan for the day. Literally from the time he arrived at the school property, there was an adult that had to meet him, and he was never to be more than 4 or 5 feet away from this adult, so that they could always hear what Adam was saying. And when it came time to come in the building, the adult had to walk him. Adam never went to the bathroom with other kids. He always had to go by himself. That was, there had to be a clear bathroom before he could go in there. And literally from the time lunch, recess, and you could just see these adults passing him from one person to the other. Within 2 weeks, we never heard of Adam's name again. All the accusations of the F word stopped, because he knew he couldn't say that word in front of a teacher. And then the other kids weren't accusing him of anything. And that whole cycle of of us responding to him because somebody said he said the word took time and effort, and it stopped. And he learned different behaviors. And we used the Adam plan for lots of kids. It seems like it was a real tight adult, restriction of his, maybe of his freedoms, but for him, it needed it. He needed it, and it worked. And other kids, and then after a period of time, we could ease up on that, and he was successful.
Yeah. Well, it almost sounds too like part of it is that adult presence, and, and maybe just like the building that relationship with the other adults may also impact that too, and thinking about that sort of as a more tier 3, you don't have a building full of Adams, but,
right.
Some of that 5% of students who need plans like that. I like the way that the teacher thought of like, well, clearly he says it like to say the word in front of students. So if we always put an adult in his presence, maybe this will deter his language.
in his way, he was getting the attention and that he needed, or he thought he needed, and we tried to teach him how you can get attention in more positive ways.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the thing is really kind of understanding that function of behavior, right? It's coming back to like, where is that behavior coming from? And it's being a detective about the behavior of students to help be preventative instead of just constantly reactive. Because I think this is where it does become a system level thing, where there's times when I've been in a school where it's felt like we're just reacting to things because we have so many different kinds of problems, students struggling. And so it almost feels like teachers don't have the capacity to be preventative themselves. But when it becomes a system level or a culture of the school, it becomes so much easier to do that as a teacher in my own classroom, rather than because it's that climate, right? Like that feeling of a school. I think you pick it up and like, yeah, they're just surviving from day to day. And really, how do you help from the system level? So teachers will feel supported if the system is supporting them.
That's why I wrote this book for principals. And if I don't know if it's going to show up on this.
Yeah, no. Well, what's the title for our listeners?
It's called Promoting Positive Behaviors. It's an elementary principal's guide to structuring the learning environment. So what we did with my staff, we went through every part of the day, and then we came up with a chart that you can see here of the things where kids could get in trouble. So, for instance, in the morning, the beginning of the day, we looked at all the times that our kids were causing us some problems. And so, we went through and had some goals. Is there an effective supervision plan for kids before school? Before the day starts, are kids getting in trouble because there's not enough adults out there if they're outside? Is there an effective plan for greeting parents of the kids? Is the supervisory plan, does it focus on teaching positive behaviors, or do you just observe a bunch of teachers yelling at people? Is there an effective plan for safety and security? Is there always somebody watching to see who's walking around the playground or who's walking around the perimeter of the school? We went through all of these, and then we came up with some indicators of what we wanted to see and what we thought needed to be taught. And then we graded ourselves. Are we master level, or are we, professional, or need some help? And it was helpful for us to really analyze that. Many of my some of the teachers don't, have the purview of all the things that go on in the school all the time,
Hmm.
and it depends upon how your campus is laid out too, whether teachers see things. So as we sat with the staff and talked about those things, there was a lot of learning that went on, and then this group really needed it because they
Oh,
weren't
the
they
after
weren't
school.
yeah,
Yeah.
they weren't as well trained, but boy, when they could sit there with my staff and hear what the teachers were talking about, their ears were on. They were learning. Oh, we better make sure we do this after the school day is finished. And that's just, as people change, as people retire and new people come on, this is something that needs to be taught all the time.
Yeah.
And a teacher needs to teach it all the time in his or her classroom, because not everybody that hears the lecture on the very first day of school is still there by Christmas time or there at the end of the year.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you kind of brought up a good point, because I do think, I've experienced those kind of shifts, those years where there's several older teachers that retire, right? People who kind of were like, they were part of the institution and the culture that was the school, right? The culture shifts as, newer people come in or a new principal. And so it's really having that, if you are a newer principal coming into a building, it's really thinking about observing what kind of culture was there before, and, what is it that we want to continue, and what is it this maybe we need to change. Because I think there's that work of, maybe you've experienced this in the first 6 months of being a principal in a new building. You kind of have to, there's some of it is just observing, figuring out, okay, what is the culture? What is it that we need to change?
How
How
do we
can
do
we
things around here?
Yeah, how do we do
Yeah.
things around here? Is that actually the best way to do it? Or do we just do it because we've always done it that way? Right. And there's a lot of work that has to go into that. I think very strategic thinking as a leader.
And the principal plays a key role there, because you can't delegate this to anybody.
No.
The
Yeah.
culture will also say, this is how we do things around here, and this is what we will tolerate. And if you're going to tolerate some mediocrity, everybody's going to know that. The master teachers are going to be frustrated with that, because you're allowing mediocrity. So if you allow it, if you don't deal with it effectively and quickly, then your whole culture starts to become mediocre as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good word for the principals out there. I think you probably can teach master classes and being a principal, because I think that that kind of work too. And it's not small work, but it's like stuff that's small moments throughout the day, like whether you're tolerating mediocrity, and it's how. And I would think master teachers, if they don't feel supported in the work and the standards that they have, they're going to leave. And then you're like, have to, it's a lot more work than later on.
I follow principles and still try to stay involved as much as possible. And it just, and particularly on social media, and it just breaks my heart to see so many people frustrated. They said, I can't handle it. I've reached my point. I would just like to say to them, you got to make a phone call to somebody. You got to find somebody in your life that you can call and talk to about the frustrations you're experiencing, not on social media. Talk to a live person that's walked in your shoes, and call me. I'll talk to you. Somebody. When I was a principal, I had mentors that I would call all the time. I had a good friend of mine who was a principal in Cincinnati, and we'd call each other on Friday evening just to see whether we survived. And we felt so much better after we talked to each other.
Well, and realizing that you're not alone in the work, right? I think that sometimes, I do think that's the struggle of being the principal, right? Especially if you go from being a teacher and you've got your colleagues and you're on the same level. And I've kind of experienced this at different points where I move into a position and I'm the only one of me in the building. And you can kind of feel like isolated and lonely, because there's not anybody else that you sort of can commiserate with or even just problem solve with, because as a principal, you're holding a lot of confidentiality. And so you need somebody that you can go and talk to and kind of either vent to or even just problem solve with or get encouragement from, because that can be a lonely job, especially if you having a tough year and have to deal with some tough situations.
Well, as a principal, I had that all over my state and all over the country, really. And a real quick story: I had one of my colleagues called me or texted me a couple of weeks ago, and she said, "Did you have a boy named Jerry in your school?" Now, mind you, she's on the other side of the state, you know, but we still stay in contact after years of being retired. And I said, yeah, I think I had a couple Jerrys. So anyway, she said, I was at lunch at a restaurant in Cincinnati, and I happened to notice this manager of this restaurant dealing so effectively with a family that had a special needs child. And he was so she starts talking to him like an old principal would, you know. She said, well, where are you from, Jerry? And he says, Lancaster, Ohio. She says, Lancaster, do you know Paul Young? Jerry said, yeah, he was my principal when I was in the second grade.
Oh my God.
So he says, yeah, he says, he gave me dilly bars on my birthday because we had the same birthday, March 5th.
Your birthday's March. My birthday's March 4th.
So anyway, so, you know, those little things that you do, kids will never forget. So anyway, she lets me know this, you know, how proud I was to hear one of my former students 20 years later doing so well. Well, then we walked in we actually all went down and had lunch there with Jerry. And we walked in, and Steve, my other buddy, the buddy I was talking about, he walks in, and he immediately, the chef comes out of the kitchen. He says, weren't you my principal at Princeton Local Schools? So it's a small world. If you have these connections, and if you don't have these connections, you're going to die in the profession.
Yeah.
But these were sustaining connections that still sustain us, even though we're no longer working in schools. And it all focused on kids.
Yeah. Well, and how amazing it is to share that with, you know, because you all can relate, like knowing that a former student is being successful. That is, I mean, as a former teacher, that is one of the greatest joys is when I get to see a student in the wild, a former student, and they're doing really well. And I appreciate sort of your perspective. I think this will kind of encourage a lot of our listeners just in the work they're doing, whether it's being a principal or a school leader in some capacity, just understanding how that building those systems and the positive culture can impact.
Well, and it's those calls like that you get, you know, from somebody years later. Oh, did you know your kid was doing such a good job? And if you pour your heart and soul into these kids, when you find out they're successful, you know, that's worth more to me than any amount of money anybody could pay for me. Yeah. You know, I mean, I probably could have made a lot more money doing a lot of other things, but, you know, when I see my kids succeed, that means obviously my own kids, I want them to succeed, but I want the kids in my school and anybody that I'm working with. That's why I'm here. And that's why we're all here. And we got to help each other because it's tough. I know it's tough. It's hard. It gets harder and harder and harder, but if we reach out to each other and understand what we have to teach, if we forget what our major role is. I learned a long time ago the word discipline means to teach. Punishment is a consequence for something that happens because you look in a child's eyes and you can tell whether they understand what you're talking about. And then if they deliberately choose to break that, you know, that trust that you've developed with them, then they probably need to have a punishment. But if they haven't been taught in the first place what they were supposed to be doing, why are we punishing them? That is so cruel.
That's so true.
Cruel. But if you know you've taught them, then I think a punishment's okay. Yeah. So when I keep talking about, your band was so disciplined back when I was band director. Yeah, it was because we taught a lot of stuff, and the kids knew what they had to do. It was discipline means and when somebody walked into my school and said, "Oh, this place is disciplined," that was the best compliment I could get.
Yeah, because you taught them that.
It was this result of our teaching.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. This was just delightful, and I'm so excited to share this with our listeners.
Well, been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn @Branching Minds.